I didn't move away from the screen even after the transfer completed. The confirmation glow lingered on my face like a second reflection, colder than the glass behind me. Somewhere in the distance, city traffic echoed faintly through sealed windows, a hum of lives unaware they were standing on shifting ground. My phone vibrated again, but I didn't look this time. I already knew the pattern. Panic would arrive soon. Confusion would follow. Then denial. Then collapse dressed as confidence. I leaned back slowly, the leather chair creaking under my weight, and I allowed myself breath that felt like ownership instead of survival. They had mistaken my silence for absence. That was their first mistake. On the screen, Project Black Crown pulsed once before locking into execution mode. No return. No reversal. Just inevitability dressed as data. As I turned my gaze toward the skyline, I realized something simple and irreversible had already begun. They were no longer part of my future. I was their ending now. The moment I stepped through my family's front door, I already felt it. The air was different. Not colder in temperature, but colder in intention. The kind of silence that doesn't welcome you, it evaluates you. My heels clacked softly against the marble floor, each step echoing through a house that once pretended to be mine. The dining table was already set. Too perfect. Too still. Crystal glasses aligned like they were waiting for a celebration I was never invited to. My mother didn't look up first. She never did when she wanted control of a room. Instead, I heard her voice before I saw her face. Adrian's name landed on the table like a polished weapon. He upgraded, she said, almost proudly. The words didn't shake me, but something inside me recalibrated. A quiet internal shift, glacial, precise, like a lock clicking into place. My father sat at the head of the table, his posture carved into authority, the mahogany chair creaking faintly when he shifted. He didn't even pretend to soften the blow. "You are always too ambitious for a black woman trying to climb that high," he said. Not anger, not disappointment, judgment. Clean, rehearsed, inherited. I noticed how his fingers tightened around the glass, knuckles white, but only when he thought I wasn't watching him carefully enough. My sister was already there, lighter skin catching the chandelier's glow in a way mine never did in their eyes. She didn't need to speak. Her smirk did it for her. It carried years of competition I never agreed to enter. And yet, they still insisted I was losing. What they didn't know was simple. I wasn't competing. I was documenting. The room smelled faintly of roasted spices gone cold, as if dinner had been waiting for a version of me that would react. The chandelier above us chimed softly when the air conditioning shifted, a delicate sound that felt almost mocking in its elegance. I sat down without asking permission. My movements were slow, controlled, deliberate. The chair beneath me was polished wood, too pristine for comfort, like everything else in this house, beautiful on the surface, hollow underneath. My mother finally looked at me fully. "There's no need to make this harder than it is," she said. "Adrian chose a better match. You should understand that by now." A better match. I repeated the phrase in my mind, not emotionally, but analytically, like I was auditing a statement that didn't balance. My chest didn't burn. It cooled. Something inside me shifted from wounded recognition into something far more dangerous. Calculation. I reached for my phone, placing it face up on the table. The screen lit briefly. Adrian's face still there, smiling beside her. The younger model, the replacement they all agreed, made more sense. My father exhaled sharply. "Put that away. Don't turn this into drama." Drama. That word always appeared when truth became inconvenient. I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I simply observed how easily they had aligned themselves against me, as if my value had always been conditional on their approval. And then I noticed it. A notification blinked across my screen, too technical to be personal. Financial access log. My eyes didn't widen. They narrowed. Adrian had been inside our family-linked financial system. Not once. Repeatedly. Unauthorized access. My fingers remained still, but inside, something sharpened into focus, so clean it almost felt silent. The kind of silence that happens right before impact. My mother continued speaking, unaware of the fracture forming beneath her own table. He is building something bigger than you ever could alone, she said. My sister added softly, almost sweetly, some people just don't evolve, Naomi. The chandelier above us flickered slightly, a tiny tremor in the light. The room felt tighter now, like the walls had leaned in to hear my response. I didn't give them one. Instead, I memorized everything. The angle of their faces, the confidence in their voices, the casual cruelty disguised as family advice. Each detail was stored with surgical precision. My father leaned back, satisfied with his imagined victory. This is for your own good. You'll understand one day. I almost smiled at that. Not because it was funny, because it was predictable. They thought they were speaking to the version of me who still needed their interpretation of success. They had absolutely no idea that version had already stopped existing. My phone chimed again softly, another access trace. Another breach. Adrian wasn't just leaving me. He was extracting value while doing it. And my family, they were endorsing it without even knowing they were part of the transaction. The realization didn't hurt. It clarified. I stood slowly, chair legs dragging against the marble with a low, grinding thud that finally pulled their attention back to me. All eyes turned. I adjusted my tailored coat, black, structured, armor disguised as elegance, and looked at each of them without urgency.
No emotion, no pleading, no collapse.
Just observation. My mother's expression tightened slightly. My father's jaw shifted. My sister's smirk faltered for half a second before returning. They were waiting for me to break. I didn't. Instead, I picked up my phone again, already deciding which fragments of this moment would matter later. And I realized something even clearer than betrayal. They weren't just choosing him over me. They were participating in my erasure, willingly. I placed my phone back down gently. The sound of it touching the table was soft, but final in a way they didn't yet recognize. My voice came out calm, almost distant. They weren't just betraying me. A pause. Not hesitation. Timing. They were selling themselves. The first time I saw her after the engagement fallout, she was standing under a chandelier that looked almost identical to the one my mother once insisted defined real elegance. Crystal light fractured across her skin as she posed for cameras she'd known, smiling like she belonged in a world she had never built. I watched the video in silence. No sound from my surroundings mattered. Only the rhythm of her performance did. The soft clack of heels on polished marble. The echoed laughter of people who thought proximity to wealth meant ownership of it. Brielle. Her name sat in my mind like a file waiting to be opened. I didn't feel jealousy. That was the old version of me's language. What I felt now was structure forming, clean, measurable, and disturbingly calm. My phone chimed again with another notification. Adrian Blake Ventures had processed a new, strategic capital flow adjustment. The timestamp read 3:41 a.m. Not business hours. Not standard procedure. Unauthorized rhythm always reveals intention. I leaned back in my chair, the leather cold against my spine, and let my mind shift into analysis mode fully. The apartment around me was quiet, too quiet for how loud the truth was becoming. Outside my window, Manhattan moved like a living circuit board of light and ambition. Brielle posted again. This time a private jet wing, champagne glass, gold rim catching sunlight like it was proof of ownership. The caption read, "New chapter, new elevation." Elevation. I almost smiled. Not because it was impressive, because it was traceable. I opened the financial routing logs connected to Adrian's startup. Layers of shell entities unfolded like a slow, collapsing illusion. One account name repeated itself across jurisdictions, always slightly altered, always slightly wrong. The pattern wasn't random. It was lazy confidence, the kind people use when they believe no one like me is looking. My fingers moved across the keyboard, steady, precise. Each click echoed softly in the room, like a metronome counting down something inevitable. And then I saw her. Brielle wasn't just a passenger in Adrian's new life. She was inside the system. Payments routed through influencer management fronts. Luxury sponsorships tied to investment visibility campaigns. And beneath it all, clean, hidden transfers feeding directly into Adrian's startup liquidity pool. My chest didn't tighten. It cooled further. Cold, biting fury doesn't burn, it organizes. A new file opened on my screen. Cross-reference data streams confirmed what I was seeing. Brielle was not just a model. She was a conduit, a beautifully packaged access point for laundering capital disguised as lifestyle branding. The chandelier in my apartment flickered slightly, as if responding to my stillness. I noticed everything now. Temperature shifts, electrical hums, the smallest betrayals of systems pretending to be stable. I whispered to myself without realizing I had spoken. So that's the upgrade. My voice didn't carry anger. It carried recognition. Because now I understood Adrian's choice. It wasn't emotional. It was operational. Brielle wasn't better than me. She was usable in ways I refused to be. A soft chime from my system alerted me to a deeper access layer being unlocked. I didn't initiate it. That meant someone inside Adrian's network was actively moving funds again. At 2:17 a.m., a transaction worth $1,940,000 passed through an offshore clearinghouse tied to Brielle's management firm. My fingers paused, not in shock, in confirmation. This wasn't betrayal in the way my family liked to frame it. This was structure collapsing under its own arrogance. I stood slowly, walking toward the window. The glass was cool beneath my fingertips. Below, the city pulsed with indifferent life. Car headlights streaked like data points moving through a system no one fully understood. Brielle appeared in another clip, this time at a private dinner. Gold cutlery, white orchids, a table so pristine it felt staged for importance rather than intimacy. Adrian was briefly visible in the background, smiling. My pulse remained steady, but something in my perception shifted permanently. I was no longer watching a replacement. I was watching a mechanism, and mechanisms always leave traces. Back at my desk, I compiled everything. Payment trails, social amplification patterns, investment disguises, emotional branding loops designed to keep investors distracted while liquidity drained through aesthetic performance. Each piece clicked into place like mahogany drawers closing in a silent archive. I finally understood Brielle's function in Adrian's ecosystem. She wasn't the prize. She was the cover. And I had been replaced by something structurally weaker but strategically useful to him. That realization did not hurt. It refined my focus further. A memory surfaced, my father once saying ambition was dangerous for a woman like me. My mother agreeing in softer words. My sister smiling like approval had to be earned through erasure. I closed the memory immediately. Irrelevant data. I reopened Brielle's latest post.
Zoomed in.
Background reflections in glass. Hidden identifiers. A luxury venue whose booking records I could trace within minutes. Everything about her life was performance-level access pretending to be ownership. My system flagged another anomaly. A secondary investor, unlisted, funding Adrian's expansion through Brielle's network. That name wasn't familiar, but the structure around it was. Foreign, institutional, controlled, impatient. I felt it then. Not emotion. Awareness. Something larger was touching Adrian's world now. Something that didn't care about his arrogance or Brielle's performance. And I was standing directly between their illusion and reality. I whispered again, quieter this time. They think this is a game of replacement. I turned back to my screen, where Brielle's smile still lingered in frozen perfection. But they don't even know what system they've entered. My cursor hovered over a newly generated folder labeled automatically by my tracking system. Secondary liability exposure. Active. I didn't open it yet. Because once I did, there would be no way to pretend this was still about Adrian at all. And the question forming in my mind wasn't about him anymore. It was about who else was watching Brielle and why I hadn't seen them first. The moment that sentence formed in my mind, evidence instead of replacement, something in me settled into a colder architecture. Not heartbreak, not jealousy, something far more permanent. Structure. I replayed Brielle's latest appearance again, not for emotion, but for detail. The way the crystal chandelier above her shimmered too perfectly, as if staged. The soft clack of champagne glasses in the background. The carefully curated laughter that echoed just slightly too long, like sound being held hostage by performance. Everything about her world was curated instability. And instability always leaves receipts. My screen chimed softly, an automated alert from my tracking system. Another transaction loop had completed through Adrian's startup infrastructure. Same pattern, same laundering rhythm, but now something different appeared underneath the flow. A third-party validation signature. That changed everything. I didn't move at first. I simply let the information sit in my mind like weight being distributed across a collapsing floor. My apartment was quiet, but not empty. The hum of the air conditioning brushed against my skin like a controlled breath. Manhattan outside was still alive, still ignorant, still convinced nothing underneath it was shifting. But I knew better now. I opened the deeper audit layer. Rows of financial movement unfolded across the screen like mahogany drawers opening in a hidden archive. Clean lines of numbers. Pristine formatting designed to look legitimate. But beneath it, the rhythm was wrong. Too coordinated. Too dependent on visual trust instead of structural integrity. And then I saw it. Brielle wasn't just attached to Adrian's system. She was embedded inside its liquidity cycle. Not as a beneficiary. As a funnel. My chest didn't tighten. It cooled further, as if emotion itself was being filtered out of me in layers. I leaned back slowly in my chair, the leather creaking faintly under my weight. The sound echoed in the room, small, but deliberate. This wasn't betrayal anymore. This was infrastructure exposure. I pulled up Brielle's public timeline again. Every luxury post, every staged event, every crystal-lit dinner. Each one now recontextualized as data points feeding investor perception loops. She wasn't just being shown off. She was being used to manufacture confidence. My fingers paused over the keyboard as another alert chimed, soft, almost polite. A new offshore transfer had just cleared. Timestamp, 11:09 p.m. Amount, $2,740,000. I exhaled slowly. Not because I was surprised, because the scale had confirmed intent. I stood and walked toward the window, the floor beneath my feet cool against my bare awareness. The glass reflected me faintly, tailored silhouette, controlled posture, eyes steady in a way my family never understood. Outside, the city lights shimmered like scattered decisions made by people who never expected consequences. Behind me, my system updated again. Another pattern match. And this time, a partial name surfaced in the metadata chain connected to Brielle's funding route. It wasn't Adrian. It wasn't her management firm. It was something older. Institutional. Quietly embedded. I narrowed my eyes. That was new information. And new information always changes power dynamics. A memory flickered. Adrian's smirk the day he left. My family's silence when they endorsed it. My father's voice calling my ambition inappropriate. My mother's approval of someone who looked easier to love. My sister's quiet satisfaction in proximity she didn't earn. All of it suddenly felt like background noise to a system I was only now fully seeing. I returned to my desk. My fingers moved faster now, but still controlled.
No urgency.
Only direction. I isolated Brielle's financial identity cluster and began tracing backward. Not where she appeared, but where she was introduced. The trail didn't start with Adrian. It started with an intermediary fund disguised as luxury talent investment. The chandelier in my apartment flickered slightly, as if reacting to the shift in my focus. Or maybe I was just noticing systems more now. Everything felt louder in its honesty. The soft hum of electronics. The distant siren outside. Even my own breathing sounded calibrated. I pulled up another layer. And there it was. A silent partner node. No public identity.
No branding.
No visible presence in Adrian's ecosystem. But its timing aligned perfectly with Brielle's first introduction into his world. My jaw didn't clench. My attention sharpened. Because I recognized the pattern. Not the name. The structure. This wasn't random influence. It was placement. Strategic insertion disguised as romance optics and startup growth narrative. Brielle wasn't chosen because she was better. She was chosen because she was deployable. A soft sound rattled through my apartment as the air conditioning adjusted again. The temperature shifted slightly, barely noticeable, but enough for my skin to register it as colder. Glacial, almost. Like the room itself had started agreeing with my conclusions. I opened Brielle's most recent private tagged event photos.
Zoomed in.
Reflections in glass. Background figures blurred, but not absent. And there, just briefly, a man standing too still in the corner of the frame. Not posing. Not performing. Observing. I paused. That wasn't in the public narrative. My pulse remained steady, but my focus narrowed into something razor-sharp. This was no longer just Adrian's collapse in progress. This was surveillance architecture layered under social performance. I whispered to myself, barely audible. So this is the real system underneath her face. The words didn't carry emotion. They carried recognition. I leaned forward again, opening a fresh analysis layer, labeling it without hesitation. Origin node trace. Active. My cursor hovered before initiating the deep scan. Because I already understood what I was about to uncover. And once I confirmed it, Brielle would stop being a symbol in Adrian's story entirely. She would become the entry point to something much larger. Something that had already started watching me back. The cursor blinked, waiting, as if asking one final question I couldn't avoid anymore. How far do you want to see this go before it stops being about him? The cursor was still blinking when the memory hit me, sharp, uninvited, precise. I didn't close the screen. I didn't move away from it. I just let it sit there, suspended in digital silence, while something deeper inside me pulled me backward through time. Because this wasn't just about Brielle anymore. It never was. The room around me dimmed slightly, as if the light itself was deciding to retreat. My apartment stayed quiet, but the silence had changed texture. No longer neutral, but weighted. Like it was carrying something I had spent years refusing to name. And suddenly I was back there. Not in Manhattan, but in a smaller room. A tighter air. A version of a home that always felt like it belonged to someone else's favorite child. The smell of boiled spices and polished wood. The soft clack of dishes being arranged with care that never quite reached me. The chandelier in that house wasn't crystal like now. It was cheaper, dimmer, but still trying to imitate importance. I remember standing slightly to the side. Always slightly to the side. My skin, dark, unambiguous, unsoftened by their preferences, always caught attention in ways that never translated into praise. It was noticed, but not celebrated. Observed, but not cherished. You have to be realistic, Naomi, he said once, sitting at a mahogany table that felt too large for truth. Light skin opens doors. You open problems. The words didn't land like insult at first. They landed like instruction. My chest tightened faintly in the memory, not pain, not exactly. Something colder. Recognition of how early systems teach hierarchy before you even understand consent. In that moment, I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I simply absorbed. Because I had already learned something important even then. In my family, silence was safer than contradiction. But silence has a cost. And I paid it in years. The present flickered back for a moment, my screen still glowing, Brielle's digital existence still open, still performing a life she did not architect. And I realized something uncomfortable. I wasn't just analyzing her anymore. I was recognizing a pattern I had lived inside. The way Brielle was being used wasn't new. It was familiar. Different packaging. Same structure. My mother's voice echoed again in memory, sharper this time. She doesn't need to struggle like you do, she once said about my sister, almost tenderly. Some people are just built for better things. Built. As if value was genetic preference instead of effort. I felt my jaw relax slowly. Not from relief. From control. Because this was the moment where emotional noise could have taken over. But it didn't. Something else was forming now. Quiet, organized, lethal in its calm. I stood and walked toward the window, letting the glass reflect me faintly. Tailored silhouette. Still posture. Eyes that no longer searched for approval that never existed in equal measure. Outside, Manhattan moved like it always did. Unaware, unbothered, indifferent to internal histories unfolding behind glass. But inside me, something had shifted. A temperature change I couldn't ignore. Glacial. Not cold like absence. Cold like decision. My phone lit up with a notification. Old family group chat. A message from my mother. Be strong. Don't embarrass us over a man. A small thud echoed in my chest, not emotion, but memory aligning with present insult. Embarrass us. Not hurt you. Not lose you.
Us.
That was the language. Ownership disguised as concern. I stared at the message long enough for it to stop meaning anything personal and start meaning structural. Then I closed it without responding. My silence this time wasn't survival. It was separation. I returned to my desk, where Brielle's image still waited, frozen mid-smile, mid-performance, mid-illusion. And I saw it differently now. Not as competition, not even as replacement, but as continuation. Because what my family had done in private, measured love, distributed approval, weaponized comparison, was simply repeating itself at scale through Adrian's world. Different stage. Same system. A soft chiming sound came from my computer as my background analysis updated automatically. New correlation detected. Historical pattern match confirmed. I leaned in slightly. A new piece of information surfaced. Brielle's initial entry into Adrian's circle hadn't been random exposure or influencer networking. It had been facilitated. Introduced through a curated pipeline tied to elite image consulting firms, firms that specialized in shaping social trust assets for high-growth ventures. Not models. Not girlfriends. Assets. That word settled inside me differently. Because assets are never emotional. They are deployed. And suddenly Brielle stopped being a girl in my mind at all. She became infrastructure. I exhaled slowly, the sound almost inaudible in the room. Behind me, the chandelier in my apartment flickered again, subtle, crystalline reflections scattering across the ceiling like fractured memories trying to reassemble themselves. I didn't turn around.
I didn't need to.
Something deeper had already aligned inside me. Not anger, not sadness, but clarity sharpened into direction. I whispered into the empty room, my voice steady and low. So this is what they were building the whole time. My fingers hovered over the next dataset. One click away from exposing everything that connected Brielle, Adrian, and the system that shaped both of them.
But I didn't click yet.
Because I understood something more important now. If I opened it too early, I would only see the surface. And I was done looking at surfaces. My hand remained still above the mouse. And in the silence that followed, one thought formed, quiet, irreversible, absolute. I was no longer asking why I was rejected. I was about to understand what my rejection was designed to protect. The moment I decided not to click immediately, the silence in my high-rise office changed shape. It stopped feeling like emptiness and started feeling like containment. As if the room itself understood, I had shifted from reaction to intention. Outside the floor-to-ceiling glass, Manhattan stretched endlessly, crystal lights flickering like distant data points in motion. Somewhere far below, traffic moved like unconscious systems obeying rules they never questioned. But up here, above it all, I felt something different beginning to form inside me.
Control.
Not the illusion they all used in conversations. Real control. My fingers hovered over the keyboard again, but this time there was no hesitation in my body. Only precision. The air in the room felt colder than before, a subtle drop in temperature that made the glass reflect my silhouette with sharper definition. Tailored posture. Still hands. Eyes that no longer searched for answers. They constructed them. I opened Project Black Crown fully. The system didn't just expand. It revealed itself. Layer after layer of financial architecture unfolded across my screen like mahogany drawers sliding open inside a sealed vault. Offshore transfers. Artificial valuation spikes. Ghost investors hiding behind legitimate-sounding entities. Every file carried a rhythm now familiar to me, the rhythm of people who believed complexity could hide corruption. But it didn't stop there. Because then I saw my name, not as victim, as dependency node. Adrian's entire startup ecosystem had been quietly structured around one constant approval stream, my consulting signatures, my review timestamps, My validation metrics. Without me, the system didn't just slow down. It destabilized. I leaned back slightly in my chair, the leather creaking softly under my weight. The sound echoed through the quiet office like confirmation. My chest remained steady, but something inside me shifted temperature again, glacial clarity replacing anything that once resembled emotional uncertainty. They hadn't just used me. They had built around me. My mother's voice flickered briefly in memory. Don't embarrass us over a man, but it didn't carry weight anymore. It sounded distant now, like an outdated instruction set running on incompatible hardware. I minimized that thought immediately. Irrelevant. What mattered was structure. I pulled up transaction histories tied to Adrian's startup. Every illegal offshore movement had one consistent dependency: timing alignment with my consulting approval cycles. My signature didn't just authorize legitimacy. It stabilized liquidity confidence. My fingers slowed, not from doubt, but from recognition of scale. A soft chiming notification echoed from my system as another layer unlocked automatically. The sound was delicate, almost elegant, but in this context it felt like a warning bell for something already collapsing. Then I saw the pattern. Every time Adrian's public valuation surged, it followed within hours of my professional endorsement. Every time investors gained confidence, it was after my compliance validation. I wasn't adjacent to the system. I was the anchor point pretending to be support. My breathing remained even, controlled. But my perception of everything shifted again, sharper now, like the room had lost its softness entirely. A faint smell of polished metal and air conditioning filled the space as the HVAC system adjusted. Even the environment seemed to be recalibrating around my stillness. I opened a second layer, legal structuring framework, and began building. Not emotionally, mechanically. Each flagged transaction became a node. Each dependency became a lever. Each approval signature became traceable influence under regulatory scrutiny if reframed correctly. The system didn't feel like revenge. It felt like documentation. A slow, precise mapping of everything they had assumed would remain invisible. My phone vibrated once on the desk. A message preview lit the screen. Adrian, we need your review on the latest funding round. Investors are waiting. I stared at it without moving. Waiting. That word used to mean pressure. Now it meant exposure. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened his latest funding structure file and began cross-referencing it against my compiled dependency map. The connections aligned too cleanly, too perfectly, like someone had designed the system to rely on stability without ever questioning its source. A soft thud echoed somewhere in the building, distant construction or closing elevator, but in my mind, it felt like a shift, like something structural had just been acknowledged by reality itself. I whispered quietly to the empty office, my voice calm enough to feel almost detached. So, this is what they build on me.
No anger. No disbelief.
Just recognition. I leaned forward again, tightening my focus. My fingers moved faster now across the keyboard, not frantic, but deliberate. Controlled escalation. I began tagging every dependency point, every fraudulent valuation adjustment, every offshore reroute that depended on my approval timeline. And with each tag, something inside me reorganized. Pain didn't disappear. It relocated. It stopped being something I carried and started becoming something I observed. The chandelier-style reflection from the city lights outside flickered across my glass wall, scattering fragmented brightness across my desk like broken certainty. I noticed everything now: the rhythm of server responses, the latency in financial logs, the subtle delays in approval propagation. It all spoke. It all admitted something. That I was never just participating in Adrian's world. I was stabilizing it. Another notification chimed softly. A system alert I hadn't triggered manually. Critical dependency map complete. Collapse vector available. I paused. Not in hesitation. In acknowledgement. Because now the system was offering me something it had never offered before. A path. A structure that could be inverted. A framework that could turn dependency into exposure. I leaned back slowly, letting the chair support me fully as I studied the words on the screen. The room felt colder again, but not uncomfortable.
Precise.
Like temperature itself had become part of the strategy. My reflection in the glass looked different now. Not softer. Not broken. Defined. And for the first time since everything began, I understood exactly what I had become inside this system. Not a participant. Not a victim. Not even an observer. I was the calibration point they never knew they were measured against. My fingers hovered over the final execution layer of Project Black Crown, still unopened, still waiting. And in the silence of that high-rise office, I finally understood the cost of everything they had done. Because the moment I activated it, there would be nothing left of their version of stability to return to. And the only question remaining was no longer about them. It was about how cleanly I wanted the silence to fall when I was done. The words I had just whispered didn't fade into the room. They settled into it, like a final instruction the space itself had chosen to obey. I am no longer the woman they underestimated. For a moment, nothing happened.
No dramatic shift. No sudden clarity.
Just silence stretching across my empty office, thick enough to feel physical. The city outside continued its indifferent rhythm, lights flickering, distant traffic echoing upward in soft, broken patterns, but up here, everything felt paused.
Contained.
Like the world was holding its breath without realizing why. I stood still in front of the glass wall, staring at my reflection.
Dark-skinned.
Tailored silhouette. Eyes steady, but no longer searching for validation in them. For so long, I had been seen through other people's definitions.
Daughter.
Fiancé. Consultant. Problem. Ambitious. Difficult. Too much. Not enough. All labels placed like glass over my identity, distorting it just enough for them to feel comfortable.
But now,
the glass didn't distort me anymore. It only mirrored. A soft hum from the air conditioning system moved through the room, followed by a faint chiming sound from somewhere deep in the building's infrastructure. Even the sounds felt distant now, as if I was no longer inside the same frequency as the rest of the world. I exhaled slowly. Not relief. Separation. My fingers loosened at my sides. I hadn't realized they were slightly clenched until now. Not trembling. Not emotional. Just tension stored from years of being shaped by rooms like this one. Rooms where I was always expected to justify my existence through performance. The glass reflection flickered slightly as the city lights shifted outside. For a second, it looked like another version of me was standing beside me. Not softer. Not weaker. Just older in understanding. I studied her carefully. Not with recognition. With evaluation. What do I still carry that belongs to them? The question didn't feel painful. It felt surgical. My posture shifted subtly. Shoulders relaxing, spine aligning, not into confidence, but into efficiency. The kind of alignment that happens when a system stops wasting energy on unnecessary resistance. I turned slightly, walking back toward my desk. The leather chair was still warm from earlier, a faint reminder of presence in an otherwise empty room. The surface of my desk reflected a faint glow from multiple monitors still open, Project Black Crown, dependency maps, transaction flows, legal structuring layers. All of it still alive, waiting. But something inside me was no longer participating in the same emotional framework as before. I sat down slowly. The chair creaked softly under my weight, a sound that echoed through the silence like a closing argument. My hands moved across the keyboard again, but this time without hesitation, without emotional residue slowing each decision. The system responded instantly, as if recognizing a new operator had taken control. Not faster, not louder, just cleaner. A notification chimed softly, one of my tracking modules completing a deeper identity consolidation layer. Names, roles, connections, financial dependencies, all reorganized into a structure that no longer resembled chaos, but design. And within that design, I saw myself differently, not as someone reacting to betrayal, but as someone who had already absorbed it and repurposed it. A faint smell of cooled metal and polished surfaces filled the room as the ventilation adjusted again. The temperature seemed to drop slightly, not enough to notice consciously, but enough for my skin to register it as truth. Glacial clarity.
Controlled detachment.
I leaned back and looked at the ceiling for a moment. No chandelier here like in my childhood memories. No inherited symbolism of status or approval. Just clean architectural lighting designed for function, not validation. And somehow, that felt more honest. My phone vibrated once on the desk. Adrian. Again. I didn't pick it up immediately. Instead, I studied the vibration as if it were just another data point. A signal from a system that still believed it had access to me. Then I reached for it. The screen lit up his name. No emotion rose in me. Only recognition of timing. I answered. Silence on the other end for a second, too long. Then his voice, slightly strained, but still carrying the arrogance of someone who hadn't yet understood the slope beneath his feet. Naomi, I need your signature on the funding review. Investors are getting nervous. I didn't respond immediately. I let the silence sit between us. Because silence, I realized, was no longer absence. It was pressure. On the other end, I heard a faint rattled sound. Papers shifting, a chair moving, the controlled chaos of a man trying to sound stable while something underneath him was already moving. Naomi, he pressed. Are you there? I finally spoke, my voice calm, stripped of all emotional residue. I'm here. Another pause. Then his tone softened slightly, performative concern layered over urgency. Look, I know things have been complicated, but this isn't personal. It's business. You understand that, right? Business. That word used to be neutral. Now it felt like confession. I understand, I said. And I did. More than he realized. A faint echo of his breathing came through the line, uneven for just a fraction of a second before he corrected it. Good, he said quickly. So, you'll approve it? I looked at my screen again. Dependency maps. Collapse vectors. Approval loops. Every piece already aligned. And then I understood something simple and irreversible. He still thought approval meant access. He still thought I was inside the system as a participant, not as its structural core. I'll review it, I said. Not refusal. Not agreement. Observation. There was a faint exhale on his end, relief mistaken for control. Good. I knew you'd. I ended the call before he finished. The screen went dark. The silence that followed didn't feel empty. It felt completed. I placed the phone down gently on the desk. The soft clack of it touching the surface echoed through the office like a sealed decision. Then I stood again, walked back toward the glass wall. Outside, Manhattan continued to glitter in its endless simulation of permanence. Crystal lights, moving traffic, distant reflections of lives that believed stability was visible. But I no longer saw it the same way, because I understood systems now. And systems don't break loudly. They reconfigure silently. My reflection stared back at me again. Same face, same posture, same presence. But the meaning had changed entirely. I wasn't the woman in the reflection anymore. I was the one deciding what she became next. I whispered into the glass, barely audible. That version of me died at 11:47 p.m. And in the silence that followed, I didn't mourn her. I archived her. The moment I finalized the approval reroute, nothing visibly changed in my world.
No alarms. No dramatic signals.
No external confirmation that anything significant had shifted. And yet I felt it immediately. Not emotionally. Systemically. A subtle rebalancing in the invisible structure I had just touched. Like a bridge adjusting under weight it was never designed to fully acknowledge. Outside my glass-walled office, Manhattan continued its illusion of stability. Cars moved in predictable rhythms. Lights shimmered in curated confidence. Somewhere below, thousands of decisions were being made by people who believed consequences always arrived loudly. I now knew better. Because collapse doesn't announce itself. It adjusts first. My fingers hovered over the keyboard for a moment longer, not because I doubted the action, but because I was observing its aftermath in real time. The system had already begun responding. Not reacting. Responding. That distinction mattered now. A soft chiming notification echoed through my monitoring interface, low priority at first glance, but escalating within seconds. Investor confidence index tied to Adrian Blake Ventures had shifted downward by 4 in under 7 minutes. Not enough to panic the system, but enough to test it. I leaned back slightly in my chair, the leather creaking with a controlled thud beneath me. The sound felt louder than usual in the quiet of my office, as if even physical objects were acknowledging change. My reflection in the glass wall remained steady. Tailored silhouette, calm posture, eyes that no longer searched for approval or reassurance. Just observation. Another notification chimed. This one sharper. Liquidity exposure variance detected. I didn't move, because I already understood what was happening before the system fully confirmed it. My rerouted approvals weren't just administrative adjustments. They were structural anchors. Every financial validation I had previously provided acted as psychological assurance for investors. My signature wasn't just permission, it was perceived stability. And now that stability was missing. Not removed. Repositioned. A faint coldness spread through the room as the air conditioning adjusted again. The temperature drop wasn't dramatic, but it was noticeable in the way it touched my skin. Icy, precise, almost clinical. The system was recalibrating around absence. I stood and walked toward the window, my footsteps soft against the polished floor. Below, the city stretched endlessly, unaware that one invisible dependency chain was beginning to loosen. My phone vibrated on the desk.
Once.
Then again. Adrian. I didn't pick it up immediately. I watched it vibrate like a living thing struggling for attention. Each pulse felt more urgent than the last, but I no longer experienced urgency the same way. Urgency was a language of people still inside the system. I was outside it now. I finally answered. His voice came through instantly, too fast, too controlled, already losing its structure beneath performance.
Naomi.
What did you do?
No greeting. No pretense.
Just rupture. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I turned slightly toward the glass, watching my reflection align with the skyline behind it. The city lights shimmered faintly like scattered data points. I reviewed the structure, I said calmly. A pause. Then a sharp exhale on his end. Not relief. Frustration trying to disguise instability. That's not what I asked, he said. Our investor confidence just dropped almost 4% in under 10 minutes. That doesn't happen without cause. I let the silence sit between us for a moment longer than comfortable. Because silence, I had learned, forces systems to reveal themselves. It didn't drop, I said finally. It corrected. Another pause. This time longer. I could hear movement in the background on his end. Chairs shifting, muted voices, the faint clack of urgent footsteps. The sound of a controlled environment losing its control. That's not how markets work, he said quickly. This is instability. Temporary volatility. We just need reassurance, Naomi. Your approval consistency is part of our valuation model. Approval consistency. The phrase almost made me smile. Almost. Because what he was really saying was simpler. He needed me to pretend nothing had changed so the illusion could continue functioning. I looked back at my screen. Multiple dashboards were now updating in real time. Confidence decay curves. Liquidity hesitation markers. Investor withdrawal probabilities increasing in gradual but undeniable increments. The system wasn't collapsing. It was revealing itself. I understand the model, I said softly. Another pause. Then his voice shifted. Less controlled now, more exposed. Then fix it. Just reinstate the approvals. We can stabilize this before it spreads. You know how sensitive the market is to perception shifts. Perception. That word again. Everything they built depended on perception. Not truth. Not structure. Just belief sustained long enough to attract more belief. I walked back toward my desk and placed my hand lightly on the edge of it. The surface was cool beneath my fingers. Real. Uncompromising. Unlike everything else they were relying on. I'm not disrupting anything, I said. My tone remained steady, measured, almost detached. I'm observing what happens when dependencies are no longer artificially maintained. A sharp sound came through the line, something clattering on his side. Paper, maybe. Or a device hitting a surface too hard. Naomi, he said, voice tightening, this is not the time for whatever this is. Investors are already asking questions. Brielle is getting calls she can't even answer properly. At the mention of her name, something subtle shifted in my awareness. Not emotion, but alignment. Brielle wasn't a participant in this collapse. She was a signal receiver inside a system she didn't fully understand. And now she was beginning to feel the feedback. Interesting. She doesn't need to answer, I said quietly. Another pause. What does that mean? He asked, but the confidence in his voice was thinning now, like fabric stretched too far. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I opened a deeper monitoring layer. Investor withdrawal alerts were accelerating. Not dramatically, not chaotically, but steadily, systematically, like a sequence that had already been programmed into inevitability. They weren't panicking yet. They were testing. And every test required confirmation. I leaned back slightly in my chair again, letting the realization settle fully into place. They're not reacting to instability, I said finally. They're reacting to absence. Silence on the line. Then his voice lower now. What absence? I turned my gaze toward the city again. The skyline reflected faintly in the glass, overlapping with my own image until it became unclear where I ended and the system began. My signature, I said. The silence that followed was different. He understood. Not fully, but enough. A faint rattled breath came through the line, controlled, but breaking at the edges. You're telling me this is about your approval logs? He asked. You're destabilizing a multi-million-dollar structure over administrative timing? I finally allowed a pause long enough for him to feel it. Then I said, it was never administrative. Another silence. Longer this time. He spoke again, but the tone had changed completely now. Less CEO, more man trying to hold something slipping through his fingers. You don't understand what this will do to us, he said. If investors lose confidence, everything Brielle has been building, everything we've structured. I cut him off gently. You mean everything you've been borrowing stability for? That landed. I could hear it in the silence that followed. Heavy, unavoidable. A faint sound of movement came again, more chaotic now. Voices in the background raised slightly. Someone calling his name. A phone being muted too quickly. And then Brielle's voice, distant but audible. Adrienne, what is happening? My manager says funds are frozen. Why are they frozen? Her tone wasn't angry. It was confused. That confusion mattered more than panic. Because confusion meant the system had started leaking into her reality. Adrienne returned to the line quickly, voice sharper now. This is temporary, he said. Naomi is just adjusting some internal processes. It will be resolved. A pause. Then Brielle again, more strained now. Why would she do that? He didn't answer immediately. Because there was no answer he could give that didn't expose dependency. I closed my eyes briefly, not in exhaustion, but in recognition of completion. The system had begun to speak for itself. And I hadn't needed to raise my voice once. When I opened my eyes again, the city outside looked unchanged. But I knew better now. Nothing that depended on illusion survives contact with absence. I ended the call without speaking. The screen went dark. And in the silence that followed, I understood exactly what had just happened. They thought the system was breaking. It wasn't. It was responding to me. The silence after the call didn't fade. It expanded. It filled my office like a physical presence, pressing gently against the glass walls, as if even the city outside had paused to recalibrate what it had just heard. They think the system is breaking, I repeated quietly to myself. My reflection in the window didn't answer. It didn't need to, because now I understood something fundamental. They weren't watching a collapse. They were inside one. And I had only just stopped pretending it was accidental. I turned back to my desk. The screen still glowed with layered dependency maps, investor decay curves, and compliance-linked approval chains. Everything was still intact visually. Nothing looked like damage. That was always the first deception of structured failure. It never looks like failure at the beginning. It looks like adjustment. A soft chiming alert echoed from my system. Calm, almost polite. Another investor hesitation threshold crossed. Another confidence downgrade triggered. The numbers shifted slowly, like a tide pulling away from shore without announcing the retreat. I studied it without emotion. Not because I didn't feel anything, because feeling was no longer a useful input. I reached for my glass of water on the desk. It was still, untouched, reflecting the soft glow of the monitors. The glass felt cool against my fingertips, pristine, controlled, stable in a way nothing else in the system currently was. Stability had become a physical contrast now. Everything else was moving. I leaned back slightly, letting the chair absorb my weight. The leather creaked softly beneath me, a sound that echoed through the empty office like a reminder that even silence had structure. And then I began preparing for the board meeting. Not emotionally, operationally, because the next phase wasn't happening in data logs or private calls anymore. It was going public. The invitation had already been accepted on my behalf. Executive Emergency Board Session. Virtual but high stakes. Full investor attendance. Advisory council presence. Legal oversight embedded in real time. Adrian had requested it. Or more accurately, he had demanded it. He believed visibility would stabilize perception. He always confused visibility with control. I stood and walked toward the mirror-like glass panel that separated my office from the rest of the executive floor. My reflection stared back at me. Tailored silhouette, calm eyes, posture aligned not with emotion, but precision. A faint memory flickered. Earlier versions of me, in rooms like this, explaining decisions too carefully, justifying competence, softening truth to avoid disruption. That version was no longer operational. The air conditioning hummed softly overhead, and for a moment I noticed how cold the room had become. Not uncomfortable, intentional, glacial clarity settling into environment as much as mind. I adjusted my jacket once.
Smooth.
Controlled. Final. And then I activated the boardroom link. The transition was instant. A soft visual distortion. Then presence. The boardroom appeared, virtual, but immersive enough to feel physical. A long polished mahogany table stretched across the center, surrounded by executives, investors, legal advisors. Crystal lighting overhead rendered everything too clean, too bright, too exposed. Faces turned toward the center. Adrian was already there, waiting, smiling. That was his mistake. He thought waiting meant confidence. But I knew now that waiting was just exposure without awareness. Naomi, he said immediately, leaning slightly forward. His tone carried practiced authority, the kind used when someone believes they are still inside a narrative they control. Glad you could join. We need to resolve this volatility situation before it escalates further.
I didn't respond.
Not immediately. I observed instead. His posture. His timing. The way he framed urgency as shared responsibility. Classic deflection architecture. Around him, investors shifted subtly in their seats. Not yet alarmed, but attentive in the way systems become when instability becomes measurable instead of theoretical. A man on the left cleared his throat. Another adjusted his tie. The room was listening. Adrian continued. There seems to be some confusion around recent approval delays, he said smoothly. We want to clarify that operational continuity is unaffected. Naomi, unfortunately, has been under personal stress, which has impacted consistency in her consulting outputs. There it was. The pivot. From system dependency to personal degradation. I watched him carefully now. Not with anger. With documentation-level attention. He leaned further in, gaining confidence from silence. I've always said emotional volatility is a risk factor in high-stakes consulting environments, he added, turning slightly toward the board. And we're seeing exactly that kind of risk materialize now. A few subtle nods around the table. Not agreement. Conditioned acknowledgement. He continued. Frankly, I believe we need to reassess reliance on her approval chain moving forward. It introduces unnecessary unpredictability into investor-facing projections.
There.
The framing was complete. I had become the variable, not the structure. He sat back slightly, satisfied now, like someone who believed they had successfully redirected a collapsing narrative away from themselves. Then he looked at me directly. Naomi, he said, softer now, almost patronizing. I know this is difficult. but we can manage this internally if you cooperate. Just confirm that all prior approvals remain valid, and we can stabilize messaging. I studied him. Really studied him. The confidence. The surface control. The belief that visibility equaled dominance. And I realized something clean and final. He still thought I was inside his system asking for permission to function. I wasn't. I had already mapped the system. I had already separated its dependencies from its illusions. And now I simply needed to allow truth to enter the room. I reached forward slowly. Not dramatically. Not emotionally. The movement was small.
Precise.
A file icon appeared in the center of the boardroom interface. No title, yet visible to others. Only me. The envelope. Adrian noticed the motion. His expression tightened slightly. "What are you doing?" he asked. Still controlled. But the edge was there now. I didn't answer him, because answers are for people still negotiating outcomes. I clicked once. The envelope opened. And everything changed. A soft sound echoed through the boardroom system. Not loud, but absolute. Like a lock finally releasing after years of pressure. The first document appeared. Federal compliance audit chain. Then offshore structuring map. Then investor misrepresentation trails. Then timestamped approval dependency loops, each one tied directly to my consulting signatures. The room didn't react immediately. That's always how elite systems fail. First comes confusion, then reevaluation, then silence that realizes it is no longer in control of the narrative. A crystal-clear notification chimed through the system as legal flags activated in real time. One of the investors leaned forward. "What is this?" someone asked quietly. Another voice. "This looks like regulatory exposure documentation." Adrian's face changed. Not immediately, but enough. Just a fraction of instability breaking through his performance. "That's not accurate," he said quickly. "Those are internal projections, not finalized compliance data. Naomi is misrepresenting operational artifacts." I finally spoke. My voice was calm, measured, detached from any emotional register he could use against me. "These are timestamped approvals tied to regulated financial flows," I said. "Each one corresponds to investor-facing valuation statements that were issued under my authorization." A pause. Then I continued. "I did not misrepresent anything. I documented it." Silence expanded again. But this time it wasn't empty. It was heavy with recognition. Adrian leaned forward sharply now. "Naomi," he said, voice tightening, "you're jeopardizing everything we've built. You're acting unilaterally, without understanding the consequences." I looked at him directly. And for the first time in this entire system, I let him see exactly what I had become. "I understand consequences better than you do," I said quietly. Another document opened automatically. Then another. And another. The system was no longer revealing information. It was validating it publicly. Investors began speaking at once now. Overlapping voices. Confusion turning into urgency. Legal advisors flagged compliance breaches in real time. Risk officers escalated alerts. The mahogany table in the virtual boardroom reflected shifting light patterns as the system recalculated exposure across every node Adrian thought he controlled. And I watched it all without movement, without urgency, without disruption, because I was no longer inside it. I was above it. Adrian stood abruptly. "Shut this down," he said sharply. "This is a targeted destabilization attempt. Naomi, you are overstepping your authority in a way that will have legal consequences." I tilted my head slightly, almost curious. "You mean the authority you thought you could route around?" That landed differently. Not loudly, but structurally. I could see it in the way his confidence hesitated for the first time. A senior investor leaned forward slowly. "Adrian," he said carefully, "is she saying she has independent control over approval-linked liquidity triggers?" Adrian didn't answer immediately, because the correct answer would expose everything. And silence always betrays those who built systems they didn't fully understand. I closed the final layer of the envelope interface. Not dramatically, just completion. Every dependency chain now visible. Every misalignment documented. every illusion of stability replaced with structured truth. And then I said the final line, not as a threat, not as revenge, but as confirmation. He realized too late, I was never the guest in that room. The boardroom didn't respond immediately, because systems don't collapse loudly when they finally understand they were never in control. They go quiet first. And in that silence, Adrian finally understood what I had known all along. He wasn't running the meeting. The silence in the boardroom didn't end after my last words. It fractured. Not loudly, not dramatically, but in a way that was far more dangerous. Because silence inside a system like this doesn't disappear. It multiplies. I watched Adrian carefully as the first wave of investor reaction hit the room. Not panic yet. Not full collapse. Something more interesting than that. Recognition. The kind that arrives when people realize they have been holding a structure together that was never designed to stay upright. A soft-chimed alert echoed through the boardroom interface. Asset validation failures beginning to propagate across multiple investor channels. One by one, status indicators shifted from stable to uncertain. Then from uncertain to frozen. I didn't move. My posture remained still, composed, almost observational. But inside, I felt something subtle shift, not emotion, not satisfaction. Alignment. The system was now behaving exactly as mapped. Adrian's voice broke first. Naomi, he said sharply, turning toward me, stop this. Whatever you think you're proving, you're collapsing real capital structures. This isn't theoretical. I looked at him, not as a partner, not as someone I had once trusted, but as a dependency node that had mistaken temporary stability for authorship. You built on borrowed validation, I said quietly. My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. A faint sound echoed through the virtual boardroom, someone's chair shifting abruptly. A legal advisor muttered something under their breath. I didn't need to hear the words to understand the meaning. The structure was cracking. Adrian stepped forward slightly, his tailored confidence thinning at the edges. This is an overreach, he said. You're using internal access in a way that was never authorized for external destabilization. Investors, listen to me. This is a controlled misinterpretation of data. But even as he spoke, his eyes flickered, because something else had entered the room. Confirmation, not accusation. Confirmation always ends arguments faster than force. A second investor spoke, voice tight. These logs are time-stamped against regulatory filings. Another voice overlapped. And the offshore routing signatures are identical to compliance flags we flagged last quarter. The room was no longer listening to Adrian. It was listening to the structure itself. And the structure was speaking clearly now. A soft, rattled notification echoed across multiple screens as asset freezes triggered in real time. One fund after another began locking liquidity exposure. Not because of me directly, but because I had removed the illusion holding them in place. Brielle's voice suddenly broke into the system feed. Not intentional. Accidental. Her message history had been pulled into the shared audit layer through Adrian's own poorly isolated communications channel. What is happening? Why are my accounts showing restricted access? Adrian, answer me. This isn't what you promised. Her tone wasn't calculated. It was exposed. And that exposure did more damage than any legal document. Adrian turned slightly, panic slipping through now. Cut that feed, he snapped at someone off-screen. That shouldn't be visible here. Remove it immediately. But it was too late, because now everyone had seen it. One investor leaned forward slowly. So internal liquidity is being routed through non-disclosed third-party influencer accounts. A pause. Then another voice, colder. That's not just mismanagement. That's structural misrepresentation. I observed all of it without interruption, without urgency, without interference, because I didn't need to accelerate collapse. It was already correcting itself. Adrian turned back to me again, and for the first time, his voice wasn't controlled anymore. It was exposed. Naomi, whatever point you think you're making, you're destroying years of work. Do you understand the exposure this creates for you as well? That was the final attempt to bring me back into shared consequence. Shared consequence only works when both parties are still inside the same system. I wasn't. I stepped forward slightly within the virtual space. Not aggressively. Not emotionally. Just enough to shift attention back to me. And I finally spoke fully. Not long. Not dramatic. Just precise. I signed off on your downfall 3 months ago. The room froze. Not metaphorically. Structurally. Even the interface lighting seemed to pause for a fraction of a second, as if processing the weight of that sentence. Adrian's face tightened. No, he said quickly. That's not possible. Those approvals were routine compliance reviews. I interrupted gently. Those approvals were dependency mapping confirmations, I said. Every signature I gave was a stability signal you used to inflate investor confidence. A pause. Then I continued. I stopped providing that signal. That was it. No further explanation required. Because systems don't fail when attacked. They fail when support stops behaving like support. A low chiming alarm echoed through the boardroom interface, this time louder. More urgent. Liquidity thresholds breached across multiple portfolios simultaneously. Asset managers began speaking over each other, voices overlapping in controlled panic. Adrian stepped back slightly. For the first time, he didn't look like someone leading a company. He looked like someone watching a framework he never understood begin to collapse around him. Brielle's feed flickered again in the background, confused, fragmented, escalating. This isn't normal, she said. Why is everything being frozen? Adrian, you told me I was secure in this structure. Her voice cracked slightly at the end. Security. That word again. Everything in his system was built on people believing they were secure. And now none of them were. A faint sound of glassware clinking echoed through the virtual space as background investor environments updated in real time. Luxury settings, boardrooms, private wealth dashboards all shifting from green to red indicators. The system wasn't just failing. It was reclassifying itself. Adrian finally turned fully toward the board. This is manipulation, he said, voice rising now. This is targeted sabotage using privileged access. I want legal intervention activated immediately. But no one responded, because legal intervention requires a stable system to intervene in. And stability was already gone. One investor spoke quietly. This isn't sabotage, a pause. This is exposure. Adrian looked around the room now, desperation leaking through his posture. The tailored confidence that once filled his presence was collapsing into something far more human. Uncertainty. What do you all think is happening right now? He asked, voice strained. Silence answered him. Not mine. Theirs. And in that silence, something final settled across the room. Understanding. I stepped back slightly, letting the system continue its own unraveling. Because I didn't need to push anymore. The foundation had already been removed. Adrian turned back toward me one last time, voice lower now. What did you actually do? I met his gaze. And for the first time, I let him see the full shape of it. Not anger. Not revenge. Structure. I removed myself. I said simply. A pause. Then I added quietly, and everything you built was standing on that absence. The room didn't speak. No one moved. Because now they understood what he didn't want to accept. The collapse wasn't happening to him. It was happening without him. And as I watched him finally realize that truth, one final thought settled inside me with absolute clarity, and the room finally understood. I was never powerless. He was standing inside the moment it stopped belonging to him. The silence in the boardroom didn't end after my last words, it fractured. Not loudly, not dramatically, but in a way that was far more dangerous. Because silence inside a system like this doesn't disappear. It multiplies. I watched Adrian carefully as the first wave of investor reaction hit the room. Not panic yet. Not full collapse. Something more interesting than that. Recognition. The kind that arrives when people realize they have been holding a structure together that was never designed to stay upright. A soft-chimed alert echoed through the boardroom interface. Asset validation failures beginning to propagate across multiple investor channels. One by one, status indicators shifted from stable to uncertain. Then from uncertain to frozen. I didn't move. My posture remained still, composed, almost observational. But inside, I felt something subtle shift. Not emotion, not satisfaction. Alignment. The system was now behaving exactly as mapped. Adrian's voice broke first. "Naomi," he said sharply, turning toward me, "stop this. Whatever you think you're proving, you're collapsing real capital structures. This isn't theoretical." I looked at him, not as a partner, not as someone I had once trusted, but as a dependency node that had mistaken temporary stability for authorship. "You built on borrowed validation," I said quietly. My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. A faint sound echoed through the virtual boardroom, someone's chair shifting abruptly. A legal advisor muttered something under their breath. I didn't need to hear the words to understand the meaning. The structure was cracking. Adrian stepped forward slightly, his tailored confidence thinning at the edges. "This is an overreach," he said. "You're using internal access in a way that was never authorized for external destabilization. Investors, listen to me. This is a controlled misinterpretation of data." But even as he spoke, his eyes flickered, because something else had entered the room. Confirmation, not accusation. Confirmation always ends arguments faster than force. A second investor spoke, voice tight. "These logs are time-stamped against regulatory filings." Another voice overlapped. "And the offshore routing signatures are identical to compliance flags we flagged last quarter." The room was no longer listening to Adrian. It was listening to the structure itself. And the structure was speaking clearly now. A soft, rattled notification echoed across multiple screens as asset freezes triggered in real time. One fund after another began locking liquidity exposure, not because of me directly, but because I had removed the illusion holding them in place. Brielle's voice suddenly broke into the system feed. Not intentional. Accidental. Her message history had been pulled into the shared audit layer through Adrian's own poorly isolated communications channel. "What is happening? Why are my accounts showing restricted access?" "Adrian, answer me. This isn't what you promised." Her tone wasn't calculated. It was exposed. And that exposure did more damage than any legal document. Adrian turned slightly, panic slipping through now. "Cut that feed," he snapped at someone off screen. "That shouldn't be visible here. Remove it immediately." But it was too late, because now everyone had seen it. One investor leaned forward slowly. "So internal liquidity is being routed through non-disclosed third-party influencer accounts." A pause. Then another voice, colder. "That's not just mismanagement. That's structural misrepresentation." I observed all of it without interruption, without urgency, without interference, because I didn't need to accelerate collapse. It was already correcting itself. Adrian turned back to me again, and for the first time, his voice wasn't controlled anymore. It was exposed. "Naomi, whatever point you think you're making, you're destroying years of work. Do you understand the exposure this creates for you as well?" That was the final attempt to bring me back into shared consequence. Shared consequence only works when both parties are still inside the same system. I wasn't. I stepped forward slightly within the virtual space. Not aggressively. Not emotionally. Just enough to shift attention back to me. And I finally spoke fully. Not long. Not dramatic. Just precise. "I signed off on your downfall 3 months ago." The room froze. Not metaphorically. Structurally. Even the interface lighting seemed to pause for a fraction of a second, as if processing the weight of that sentence. Adrian's face tightened. "No," he said quickly. "That's not possible." "Those approvals were routine compliance reviews," I interrupted gently. "Those approvals were dependency mapping confirmations," I said. "Every signature I gave was a stability signal you used to inflate investor confidence." A pause. Then I continued. "I stopped providing that signal. That was it. No further explanation required. Because systems don't fail when attacked. They fail when support stops behaving like support." A low chiming alarm echoed through the boardroom interface, this time louder. More urgent. Liquidity thresholds breached across multiple portfolios simultaneously. Asset managers began speaking over each other, voices overlapping in controlled panic. Adrian stepped back slightly. For the first time, he didn't look like someone leading a company. He looked like someone watching a framework he never understood begin to collapse around him. Brielle's feed flickered again in the background, confused, fragmented, escalating. "This isn't normal," she said. "Why is everything being frozen? Adrian, you told me I was secure in this structure." Her voice cracked slightly at the end. Security. That word again. Everything in his system was built on people believing they were secure. And now none of them were. A faint sound of glassware clinking echoed through the virtual space as background investor environments updated in real time. Luxury settings, boardrooms, private wealth dashboards all shifting from green to red indicators. The system wasn't just failing. It was reclassifying itself. Adrian finally turned fully toward the board. "This is manipulation," he said, voice rising now. "This is targeted sabotage using privileged access. I want legal intervention activated immediately." But no one responded, because legal intervention requires a stable system to intervene in. And stability was already gone. One investor spoke quietly. "This isn't sabotage, a pause. This is exposure." Adrian looked around the room now, desperation leaking through his posture. The tailored confidence that once filled his presence was collapsing into something far more human. Uncertainty. "What do you all think is happening right now?" he asked, voice strained. Silence answered him. "Not mine. Theirs." And in that silence, something final settled across the room. Understanding. I stepped back slightly, letting the system continue its own unraveling. Because I didn't need to push anymore. The foundation had already been removed. Adrian turned back toward me one last time, voice lower now. "What did you actually do?" I met his gaze. And for the first time, I let him see the full shape of it. Not anger. Not revenge. Structure. I removed myself. I said simply. A pause. Then I added quietly, "And everything you built was standing on that absence." The room didn't speak. No one moved. Because now they understood what he didn't want to accept. The collapse wasn't happening to him. It was happening without him. And as I watched him finally realize that truth, one final thought settled inside me with absolute clarity, and the room finally understood. I was never powerless. The silence that followed the boardroom collapse wasn't empty. It was occupied, not by sound, but by consequence. I watched the final system notifications settle across my screens as Adrian's empire stopped behaving like a structure and started behaving like a case file. Asset freezes confirmed.
Investor withdrawals locked.
Legal escalation protocols triggered across multiple jurisdictions. Everything moving now was no longer operational. It was procedural. And procedure always means it's already too late to negotiate. A soft-chimed alert echoed through my monitoring system. Compliance escalation officially opened. Another followed. Then another. Each one landing like distant mechanical confirmations that the illusion had fully transitioned into documentation. I leaned back slowly in my chair. The leather creaked under my weight with a low, controlled thud, the sound echoing through my quiet office like punctuation on something already finalized. Outside the glass walls, Manhattan still glittered, still performed stability, still pretended nothing beneath its surface had shifted. But I could feel it now, the difference between noise and aftermath. Aftermath has texture. It is colder, more precise, less forgiving. My reflection in the glass looked unchanged at first glance. Tailored posture, calm expression, dark-skinned silhouette framed against city lights that never cared who they illuminated. But internally, something had completed its transition. Not transformation, completion. A system that no longer needed input. My phone vibrated once on the desk. Then again. I didn't look immediately, because I already knew who it was. Family systems always react after financial systems do. When I finally picked it up, the screen was already full of messages. My mother first. "Naomi, this is getting out of control. People are talking. You need to fix whatever you've done."
No greeting. No acknowledgement.
Just a man disguised as concern. I read it without blinking. Then another message arrived. "My father. You've embarrassed this family. Whatever dispute you have, it should have been handled privately. You are acting irrationally." I exhaled slowly. Not from emotion. from recognition. Even now, they were still interpreting consequences as behavior problems instead of structure exposure. Another vibration. My sister. This one shorter. More fractured. My internship offer was revoked. Do you know what people are saying about our name right now?
Name.
That word used to carry weight in this family. Now it only carried exposure. I placed the phone down gently. The sound of it touching the desk was soft, almost polite, but in the silence of my office, it felt final. A notification chimed again on my system. Legal filings now public. Adrian Blake Ventures officially under regulatory review. I didn't react, because reaction implies surprise. And nothing here was surprising anymore. It was sequential, predictable,
Structured.
I stood and walked toward the glass wall again, letting the city reflect across my silhouette. The air conditioning hummed faintly above me, carrying a colder tone than before. Not physically colder, psychologically colder, because now there was nothing left to anticipate, only consequences unfolding at their own pace. Behind me, another alert chimed. Bank accounts linked to family trust structures flagged for secondary review. That made me pause slightly. Not emotionally. Analytically. I turned back toward my screen and opened the notification layer. There it was. A ripple effect I hadn't directly targeted, but had inevitably triggered. My family's financial entanglements were not isolated. They were partially connected through legacy trust structures tied to Adrian's extended investor network. A system built on proximity, not ownership. Influence, not control. And now that Adrian's structure was collapsing, everything adjacent was beginning to vibrate. A faint sound rattled through my office as the HVAC system adjusted again, almost like the building itself was recalibrating around instability. I sat back down slowly. My posture remained composed, but my attention sharpened further. This was no longer about Adrian alone. It had expanded. My mother called next. I answered. Her voice came through immediately, strained, breaking in places she would normally never allow. Naomi, please. You need to stop this. People are coming to the house asking questions. Your father hasn't spoken to anyone all day. I listened without interruption, because now I could hear something beneath her words. Fear, yes, but also loss of control. A sound I had never been allowed to associate with her before. I didn't target you, I said calmly. A pause. Then she replied, sharper now. You didn't have to. Everything is connected. Do you understand what this is doing to your sister? Her opportunities are gone overnight. I tilted my head slightly. Not in confusion. In confirmation. So you're experiencing dependency exposure, I said quietly. Silence on her end. Then frustration. I don't know what that means, she snapped. But she did. She just didn't like the definition. My father's voice entered the call suddenly, lower, controlled, but unstable at the edges. This is what happens when ambition is left unchecked, he said. You've destroyed more than just a business arrangement. You've destabilized everything around you. I let that sit, then responded simply. No, I said. You were already unstable. I just removed the illusion that kept it hidden. A long pause followed. Heavy. Uncomfortable. My sister's voice appeared faintly in the background, almost pleading. I lost everything, she said. People are blocking me. I didn't even do anything wrong. That sentence landed differently. Not because it was true, but because it revealed belief. I closed my eyes briefly. Not in fatigue. In clarity. You did everything right, I said softly. Another pause. Because they didn't expect that answer. Then I continued. According to the system you trusted, proximity to perceived stability equals opportunity. That system is now correcting itself. My mother's voice broke slightly. So, what are we supposed to do now? I opened my eyes. And for the first time, I didn't respond immediately. Because the answer wasn't emotional. It was structural. Adapt, I said finally. The word echoed strangely in the silence that followed. Not harsh. Not soft. Just final. The call ended without another word. I placed the phone down again. And for a long moment, I simply sat there, watching the city move beneath me as if nothing had changed at all. But I knew better now. Everything had changed. Not suddenly. Not violently. But completely. A soft chiming alert echoed from my system again. Final legal confirmation logs sealing Adrian's case status into formal proceedings. I studied it quietly, then leaned back. For the first time in my entire life, I wasn't being asked to repair, explain, or absorb anyone else's consequences. I was simply observing truth unfold without interference. And in that silence, heavy, absolute, irreversible, I understood something I had never been allowed to fully experience before. For the first time, I was not asking for love. I was witnessing truth. The silence that followed truth didn't feel empty anymore. It felt complete. I stood by the glass wall of my office, watching Manhattan move beneath me with the same indifferent rhythm it always had. Cars tracing invisible systems of order. Lights blinking in coordinated illusion. People believing they were separate from the structures they were actually obeying. But I was no longer inside that illusion. I was above it now. A soft-chimed notification echoed from my executive system. Final corporate restructuring complete. My title updated automatically across every internal network, investor registry, and legal database. Chief Strategy Partner. Not inherited. Not assigned. Confirmed. I didn't react immediately. My reflection in the glass remained steady, dark-skinned silhouette framed by city lights that now felt less like a backdrop and more like evidence. Evidence that systems always continue. They just change ownership. A faint cold draft moved through the office as the ventilation adjusted again, and I noticed something subtle. My body no longer registered temperature the same way it used to. The air felt glacial in theory, but stable in practice. Like everything else now. Stable because I defined the parameters. I walked slowly back toward my desk. The leather chair creaked softly, with a controlled thud, as I sat down. The sound didn't feel loud anymore. It felt appropriate. Measured. On my screen, the final montage sequence was already compiled by the internal reporting system, compliance summary, restructuring outcomes, legal closures. Everything reduced to documentation. Everything except what mattered. I opened the feed, and I watched it unfold. My father first. A community hall. Muted lighting. The kind of space designed for dignity, but now stripped of it. He stood at the front, shoulders slightly lowered, no longer performing authority. People around him no longer nodded in agreement. They avoided eye contact. The shift wasn't loud. It was social evaporation. My mother next. A living room that used to host conversations now filled with silence. Phones that once rang constantly now stayed still. Invitations no longer arrived. Conversations no longer paused to include her. She sat alone, hands folded tightly, fingers trembling slightly against fabric that once symbolized status. My sister followed. Fast food uniform. Bright fluorescent lighting. Name tag slightly crooked. A minimum wage environment where identity is no longer inherited, only earned in hours. No one looked at her differently because there was no system left to elevate her. Only work. Adrian came next. Courtroom lighting. Sharp. Exposed. Documents spread across tables like open wounds. His tailored confidence replaced with restrained posture. Hands restrained not physically at first, but structurally. Then physically. Federal fraud charges confirmed. His voice attempted explanation, but systems no longer listened to language without verification. Misinterpretation of financial modeling, he said. But no one echoed it back as truth anymore, because truth no longer required his permission. Then Brielle. Or rather, absence. Luxury circles no longer referenced her. Social feeds quietly erased her presence through algorithmic forgetting. The system didn't punish her. It simply stopped amplifying her. And in her world, that was identical to disappearance. I watched it all, without interruption. Without acceleration. Without emotion interfering with clarity. Because I understood something now that I had never been allowed to understand before. Power is not destruction. It is reallocation. A soft crystalline hum echoed through my office as the final system layer updated again. Corporate ownership transfer finalized. Investor portfolios stabilized under new governance structure.
Under mine.
I leaned back slightly, letting the chair absorb my weight again. The leather creaked gently. A familiar sound. But now it belonged to me, not the system. For a long moment, I simply observed everything.
The city.
The screens. The quiet authority of completion. And then I stood. Not because anything required movement, but because stillness had already finished its purpose. I walked to the glass wall again, placing my hand lightly against it. The surface was cool, pristine, reflective. It showed me everything I had become, without distortion. No longer the underestimated. No longer the dependent variable. No longer the silent participant in someone else's structure. I was the structure now. Behind me, the final internal broadcast activated automatically. Company-wide announcement of leadership transition. Employees across multiple divisions would receive the same message. Rebuilt governance. Rebalanced authority. Recalibrated future. But I wasn't listening to it. I was watching my reflection. And for the first time, I didn't see survival. I saw ownership. A soft voice recording automatically generated from my new executive profile queued for public release. My own voice, formatted, structured, delivered to an audience that once defined me by absence. I let it play. I was never broken, it said. My reflection didn't move. I was interrupted. A pause. Then the final line. And interruption is not the end of a system. It is the beginning of correction. The recording ended. Silence returned. But it was no longer heavy. It was clean. Final. I turned slightly, walking back toward my desk one last time. The city outside continued its endless simulation of motion, but nothing in it could reach me anymore unless I allowed it. I stopped beside the chair, looking down at it for a moment, not as furniture, but as transition. Then I sat once more.
Slow.
Controlled.
Certain.
And as I placed my hands on the desk, I understood the final shift had already completed itself. Not in the world. In me. I was no longer becoming anything. I had already arrived, and I chose myself permanently.